What's up, Madridistas? This is Kiyan Sobhani. It is currently Saturday around 6 p.m. CET. So just under an hour before the game starts. And I realize it's a really ridiculous time to upload a podcast. By the time you listen to this, likely the game will be long gone. And you'll have to decide what you're going to listen to, what you're going to prioritize. Is it this? Is it the post-game show for the Sevilla game? Is it one of the other million podcasts that we've been doing in the past couple weeks or so? But I've wanted to put out a free clip for a few days now. I just haven't been able to. And that's obviously the benefit of being a patron. Timely content, everything right on cue, and it's right there for you. So make sure, if you're not a patron, go to patreon.com/managingmadrid. This clip is actually taken from Patreon. What a busy few days, though. I mean, we've just been going nonstop, really all season. But I mean, I'll just take it back to the Rayo post-game show. Ruben and I did a live call post-game podcast. We did a lot of big picture discussion. Of course, we talked a lot about racism and the reaction to the racism in the Spanish media, as well as the country as a whole, fans, whatnot, the reaction outside of Spain. We talked a lot about transfers, how to improve the squad next season, both tactically and also in the transfer market. We talked about players like Joselu, Harry Kane. Obviously, Bellingham is imminent now. I wrote about a lot of this, by the way. Go to managingmadrid.com. Last night, I put up a column about Asensio, Carlo's comments about Tchouameni's form this season, and a ton more. So go read that. It's pinned on the website. Today's clip is actually about Marco Asensio. So yesterday's live Zoom call for patrons over on patreon.com/managingmadrid. People logged on, and just before the live call started, we got the Asensio news. So we discussed Asensio. So who's going to replace him, all that stuff. I imagine the Asensio tribute stuff will probably come a little bit later. We haven't done that part of it yet, but we just talked about how do we replace him, all the different ways and different names and options we have. So that's what you're about to listen to. I also included some other stuff in there, like our defense next season, Ancelotti's assessment of how the season went, and all that stuff. That's also included in this clip. Also, just to let you know, Los Angeles, Houston, and Dallas. I think I got that order right. We are following Real Madrid's preseason tour on the West Coast. We're not doing Orlando on the East Coast. Sorry, Orlando. Apologize. Love you guys so much. But we are doing Los Angeles, Dallas, and Houston, those three. We're following the team around, going to the training sessions, going to the games, and also doing a live podcast in each of those cities. We don't have details confirmed yet in terms of venue, time, and stuff, but we have a rough idea. So once that's finalized, keep it locked on the podcast, on the social medias. If you want, you can also send us an email or a DM on Patreon. Maybe Instagram DMs. That's generally a good idea too, although that can get missed. So I would say the safest bet is either keep it locked on the site so that when we drop your city, the details, you can just click on it and book your spot in the show immediately. Otherwise, I think the best option to reach us where we will be guaranteed to see it is over on patreon.com/managingmadrid. Social media is a mess. We don't really check it as much as we would like to. So do that. Really excited for preseason. Hope you guys enjoy not only the Real Madrid Sevilla game, more importantly, Copa del la Reina final, Real Madrid versus Atletico Madrid. That's starting at 10 p.m. CET. Yash and Kanita are going to break that one down for you guys. So make sure you listen to that podcast as well. Enjoy it, guys. Thanks for tuning in. See you on the inside over on patreon.com/managingmadrid, and enjoy the clip. No, I mean, those are good answers. What I would also add is that I think you have to break down Zidane's tactical stints and philosophies almost into two different phases and eras, just like you would with Carlo, because they are similar and dissimilar in a lot of ways, but they're more similar, I think, than sometimes we think. So when Sid, I think, makes a comment about build-up structure, I think it's possible, and I don't remember exactly the context that he said it in, but it's very possible that in his mind, he's also thinking about the earlier version of Zidane in the three-peat. Because if you fast forward to the Zidane in his last season before he left, it was a completely different build-up structure at that point, and in part because there was less talent. So in some ways, I think you also have to answer this by saying, when you're talking about the difference between Ancelotti and Zidane, you also have to mention, well, there's a difference in talent too. Zidane had a very, very fluid build-up structure when he had Isco and Marcelo and Carvajal at his peak. It was extremely fluid. I mean, even we talk about Isco's roamability as the number 10 and how fluid he was, but it wasn't just him. I mean, Luka Modric was extremely fluid. He was making all kinds of runs in the right half space. He was overlapping Carvajal sometimes, and Cruz was probably the more stationary because even Casemiro was making these runs into the box. And of course, like, as I think you peel away some of the layers of paint from that team and the team gets older and the stars leave, eventually it's just a different kind of team. And he adjusted into much more conservative, less fluid, more rigid defensive structures, although he always did keep the wrinkle of sending Casemiro and Ramos into the box as his solution to many ways. And then you look at Carlo in his stint last year, for example, and even this year, did not use the width that much apart from just getting the ball to Vinicius. It wasn't using both wings, in part because Carvajal is a shell of himself at this point. Rodrigo, even when he's on the right, tends to go centrally quite a bit. He's not giving you that much width. And then you also have the factor of Carlo Ancelotti in his first stint with Real Madrid was a totally different brand of football. When he had younger Cruz, younger Modric, he had James and Isco. His build-up structure was really just about short passing triangles, close proximity, counter-pressing, control, and both him and Zidane, and I think maybe more so than Zidane, it was all about overwhelming the opponent in the box. Cross, pin, let Ronaldo and Bale get on the end of crosses, and if they can't get on the end of one of those 3 million crosses that are coming in, there's a rebound. There are midfielders counter-pressing right there to win the ball back so that a team, when they clear it, they're just basically suffocated. They can't escape. So, Zidane would get criticized for his crosses quite a bit, but in that era, it was all about creating crosses, or creating chaos and chances and overwhelming the opponent more so than it was about the crosses themselves. So I think, Zidane 1.0 and 2.0. 2.0 had less talent to work with, so it wasn't as fluid. It was more rigid. And I think Ancelotti, in some ways, is in that boat as well, if that makes sense. Makes sense, Pritish?
Yep.
Pritish?
Yep. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you so much, man. Always nice having you on the call, buddy. All right, we're going to bring in AJ. AJ, are you there?
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Yeah, regarding the Asensio news, how easy or difficult do you think it is going to be to replace his production? Because I'm just looking at the goals he scored. I feel like a lot of them are against lower tier opposition, and a lot of them seem to come when we're winning. Like, it's not as much as like when we're losing or as when we're tied. So I'm wondering if for maybe overreacting to his departure. Yeah.
Interesting question. Great question.
Yeah.
You want to go first?
I think people are quite divided on this. Some really want him out. Some really want him to stay. What I do think, though, is that most people agree that he's not a starter anymore. And maybe that's what's most important for Asensio as well. For those who don't know, it seems like Asensio has decided this himself. It's not like the club is pushing him out, but I think it was the news where that he communicated to the club that yesterday he wanted to leave. So it's leaving on free, which is also a shame for us. But regarding his production, he has had 2 quite good seasons now, and as you've mentioned several times now, Kiyan, that his goals per minute ratio this season has been his best by far. But then you look a little bit back, and then if you look at his numbers transfer market is not working at the moment. So I'm just looking at La Liga. If you just look at the league goals, 6, 1, 3, 5, 10, 9. So the last 2 seasons have been good, but it's not like he's been a goal machine for us most of the time. And he's been better lately, but I have always wondered how much of that is about him being motivated to get a new contract. This is something that has been mentioned a lot of times. And we won't know. But what I do know is that signing another 4-year or maybe even a 5-year deal with him, I wouldn't be happy to see that, because I think we have other players who would maybe we could, for example, a lot of people are thinking about Brahim, but maybe it's a good opportunity for Arribas. I mean, I would love to see that. I do think, though, we would, with most alternatives, we would be weakened short term, and then the question is long term, how will we deal with it?
Yeah, these very interesting points. I actually think this discussion is quite fascinating, because it takes us into many different directions, including the transfer market and how we strengthen and what the future without him looks like. I said this last summer, and I have to stand by it. I promised myself, it's a genuine feeling. Kind of apathetic to whatever Asensio does decide to do, in the sense that if he stays, I'd welcome him to stay. If he left, I wouldn't, I don't think that's the worst thing that could happen to this squad, to be quite honest with you, with all due respect to him. Having said all that, I think where the club goes without him is really interesting, like what they decide to do, because the fact that he has decided to leave now all of a sudden forces us to bring in a certain caliber of player, which quite frankly was needed even if he decided to stay. We needed a player, I think. If he leaves, which looks like is the case, it really forces your hand to upgrade that position. And
you think we needed a right winger if he stayed as well?
No, I don't think it necessarily had to be a right winger. I've said this many times, but I do think you needed someone as either depth or, if it's a great player who's good enough to start, then that's the player you sign. But it doesn't have to be a right winger necessarily. But
for the attack then.
Yeah, but I mean, like Asensio. But even if he had stayed, I think you needed someone. Now, like, I've also been vocal that I think someone like Arribas could take that role. I say that with a little bit of a chuckle, because everyone knows how biased I am towards Sergio Arribas. I really believe in him. But that discussion aside for a second, with Asensio leaving, what you lose is a bunch of goals per season. I think it's the correct question that was posed. How important are his goals specifically, taking into account like the quality of the team that they're scored against and also the score line and all that stuff. But I do think it's fair to point out that Arribas, statistically speaking, it has been his best season. You pointed this out. I think you could maybe argue it's not his peak necessarily, because the eye test tells us the 16-17 season was a different beast. And also the golazos he was scoring was against Barcelona, was against, he was scoring against Juve. He was scoring in big games against Bayern Munich, right? So I think you can argue that statistically he was inferior then, but possibly a better player at that point and more exciting. I think that's fair. But he did have a good year numbers wise. But I also think it's fair to point out that he did have good games against Barca and Chelsea, which were big games on the calendar this year, and Liverpool. That out of the way, and he has all the right to go and chase a better contract and a bigger role. And no matter what, I think he's going to take a downgrade in terms of club. He's not going to go to a bigger club than Real Madrid or of equal size, I don't think, because if no club at that size is going to give him a bigger role than he has at Real Madrid. No club. So there's that. But he has all the right to go and chase a different role and a different contract. He's earned that. He can do that. So best of luck to him, and thank you for everything. But in terms of the replacement, I think you have to get a certain caliber of player, Ruben, because some reports of like, oh well, we can just bring Brahim back. Asensio is a better player than Brahim Diaz. Kubo is another one that has been mentioned. I want to say this about Kubo. I think he's come a long way since last summer. Last summer, if you would have told me Kubo would be, bringing back Kubo was not an exciting proposition to me. He struggled a lot with his end product. This season, he's not nearly as good of a goal scorer as Asensio, but in terms of his playmaking and his pressing, I think he's an interesting player to bring back. I don't think he's a starter, but you're probably not, filling in a starter role anyway for Asensio. You're really just trying to bring in an Asensio, but you're not going to replace Asensio's goals with Kubo. So you're simultaneously losing depth and goals, and I think this forces the club to sign someone at a certain caliber. In that proposition actually excites me a little bit, providing that the club actually does sign someone and doesn't just break my heart and not sign anyone and just get it wrong in that sense.
So what do you think about this solution? Because Bellingham, if he arrives, that's a great addition to the midfield, and then you have Rodrigo as the starter, obviously on the right. Fede has been a star for us in many games, many important games on the right. He could play there, and then move Arribas up to the first team. I guess we would, in some ways, lose quality, but we would take both Rodrigo and Fede as starters over Asensio, I think. And then I just, if we're looking for the perfect Arribas role, I think this is it. Because he would be, Fede would be playing a lot of games in midfield. Rodrigo would be starting at the right wing, but he would also play in other positions maybe. I do see the minutes for Arribas there. I do see, if we bring another player in, I think that's it for Arribas. He will be sold with 50% or something like that. This is so fresh that I haven't really thought about it, but I think that could be a good solution, given the number of players we have in the midfield as well.
Would you rather promote Arribas next season or send him out on loan, or do the thing where we keep his rights and sell him?
Well, it depends on the situation. If we have the situation where Asensio goes, Bellingham comes in, then Fede will be playing at right wing a few times, which I just described. I would like to see an academy player for once getting the chance of the first team without going another place first. It should be possible for Real Madrid to promote players that way. Whether Arribas, what is his real quality? He's dominating at the third level, but will that mean that he can score a lot of goals for us now and do all of these assists? But I would like to see it. And then, of course, it depends on which club which would be interested to sign him, but it would make me sad to see him go.
That's, I guess, the biggest question mark of Arribas is that it's a massive step up from Castilla to the 18 level. But we have to see it. We have to see how he does. Like, he's never been given that opportunity to actually showcase at a higher level. He's just been at Castilla, and he's long overdue departure. So we would have known the answer to this much better if we had just seen it,
Yeah. This is also not a good sign for Arribas that he has gotten so few minutes with Ancelotti. Suddenly him becoming a first team player mean that he would get 1,000 minutes. It could happen. To be fair to Ancelotti, he is giving most decent players a fair amount of minutes. It's just the Marianos, the Vallejos who are not playing at all. So I think it could happen, and then it's up to him to take his chances. But he is not as good as Asensio now, but in 2 or 3 years, who will be the better player? That's another question.
The Bellingham point is interesting because, that was another piece of news that kind of was part of this pre-recording kind of flurry of news that came in, was that the Bellingham thing is starting to become closer and closer to reality. I do think it's it's a valid point to bring up Bellingham. And I think some people will look at that and be like, hold on a sec, these are completely different positions. What does Bellingham have to do with Asensio? They're different players, they're different profiles, they're different positions. But this is a point that has to be made. Bellingham, there is very, very real scenario that we will see a lot of Bellingham as the fourth midfielder, which means Vinicius, Benzema up top. Then you have basically so many midfielders to choose from, and Bellingham can play the fourth midfielder as a pseudo attacking midfielder kind of hybrid. Someone who can play in a free roaming midfield role or can roam around in front of the midfield. He can get into the box. He can go on the right wing. That's got to be like a real plausibility that the club actually may look at that. And quite frankly, now that we're kind of speaking about it and you brought it up, it actually might be the number one replacement.
And the other question was, do you rather see Valverde as right forward?
You mean like permanently, or?
Well, the second half of our Champions League and La Liga winning season, he played as a right forward, I believe, the second half of the season.
Yeah.
The important knockout stage games and the final, he gave the assist to Vinicius.
My phrase, which
at least the triplets were on the field while he was two, and he was very far up on the right wing.
Yes, for sure. So what I'm always saying to my friend when I talk about Fede is Fede Valverde siempre en mi equipo, which means Fede Valverde always in my team. I would play Fede as a right winger, center midfielder, right back, left back. I just want Fede in my team because I love him as a player and what he gives. I prefer him in central midfield. I do think that he lacks a few things that I want from a forward, but he's definitely someone who's very good profile in big games, for example. Although we do sometimes underrate Rodrigo's defensive abilities, he also tracks back and does the work. So if I could choose, it would be Fede centrally. But I like him anywhere, so for me it's not a problem.
I still think his best position is central mid. In part because I think a lot of the things he does as a right winger offensively, he can do as a central midfielder and use that as an additional resource and attack from the midfield. And part of the reason why he did play right wing in last season's run and some of this year as well is because Ancelotti just had to have him on the field because he's so good at and affects so many different facets of the game. But he also could not bench Casemiro, Kroos, Modric. So Fede had to play that role in order for him to be fitted into the starting lineup. And now it's a little bit different in the sense that Casemiro's gone and Modric and Kroos are a little bit older and Rodrigo's emerging as a really capable attacker. So there's less of a need to play him there now. And just to go back to what Fede Valverde himself has said earlier this season, where he said that he can score goals from midfield because he arrives as an additional presence. When defenders are already occupied marking the attackers, he can arrive as an additional kind of like numerical superiority as someone who arrives at the top of the box and scores goals from midfield. So also using part of his own reasoning, I also think he's better as a central midfielder than he is as a right winger, even though he can play that role. I'm just trying to find Ancelotti's quote so I can just relay exactly what he said today. He said, quote, "I don't think it was a problem with the attack," talking about problems this season. "I don't think it was a problem with the attack as we've scored the most goals. It was more so solidity at the back." And just a small part of a very much longer quote. I think in large part he's correct, because if you look at the numbers, we've created the most chances and we've scored the most goals of anyone in the league. Now our efficiency in the attack has dropped off quite a bit since last season. So while both of those things are true, offensively we have regressed, but at the same time, we are also creating more chances offensively in the league, where I think it's hurt us. And to your question, Oscar, about how do you prove that next season? Do you sign someone? I don't think you can necessarily upgrade the defensive line next season, apart from the obvious position, which is right back. And if you look at where Real Madrid's defense was bleeding this season, a lot of it was higher up the pitch. It was disjointed pressing. It was permeability between the lines. It was individual defensive mistakes from elite center backs who you wouldn't replace at all next year because they're the best in their position, and it's not a position in need. It was also giveaways at the back, like that kind of individual mistake under pressure. I don't think you necessarily upgrade that with new signings, but I think you need to fix your defensive structure as a whole, and that's where I suppose leave it, because, as Lucas always says, you can't have Courtois as your best player every game. Like, it's not sustainable. It's not a good thing. It's you praise him and you thank him, but that can't be. You can't rely on that, game in, game out. You got to fix the defensive structure, and I think that was probably Carlo's point. But at the same time, I think it's important to note. I don't know if Jiboyego is still on the call, but we were talking about this on Twitter a little bit. That it doesn't mean, like, the offense obviously needs to improve next season as well. So I don't think we can just sit here and say the offense is fine, let's just fix the defense. I don't think that was the point of what he said, and that's definitely not the point I would make either. I think if you look at the difference between this year and last year, the numbers are interesting to kind of explore, because Ruben, you and I were talking about, remember, Rodrigo's expected goals and how he's kind of underperformed that by about 50%. That will hopefully normalize next year. Benzema's actually kind of, from an analytical standpoint purely, has pretty much put away his chances away. What was really different from this year and last year was that last year he was not only putting his chances away, he was transcending it and going above, way beyond on what a normal striker does. And then that kind of skewed our expectation a little bit and our perception, and it wasn't sustainable. Yeah. And so I think that was the bigger problem.
About the defense, I just want to bring up a name. I just feel like he always gets criticism, never gets praise. Ferland Mendy has been up for almost the whole season. I mean, he's won us 2 league titles. We've been so good at times with him defensively, and I just feel like not having him. This is an underrated part of our season. I feel like we Real Madrid fans are not good at remembering that our team has big injuries as well, and we point to other teams. Oh, they missed this player, they missed this player. We've been without our best left back for almost the whole season, and how that has impacted us. I think he would have improved us for sure. And I just wanted to praise Ferland a little bit, because he always gets criticized. Oh, he's not good enough defensively, blah blah blah. But he's a top player defensively, and he's such a good player when he's at his best.
My issue with Mendy is that, and going back to last season, is honestly like one of the greatest defensive left backs I've ever seen in my life. That version of him. My problem with Mendy now is that he's never healthy, and when he's healthy, he's making defensive mistakes. So he hasn't quite hit that level of last season, and it's kind of like Gareth Bale syndrome in some sense. Not exactly on that level, but what I mean by that is Bale syndrome is this: you miss a bunch of games, and then you come back, you need like 5 games to get back into rhythm, and then you get injured again. And it just stop, start. It's a vicious cycle. And that's what Mendy is doing this season. Not his fault. It's just, I can't believe we're actually going to have 2 left backs next season. I don't know. I got to pinch myself. Is this real? We really could use someone like that. Like a Fran Garcia.
Because you agree that his absence matters.
His absence of last season matters. Like when he was on the field this year,
yeah.
he just wasn't the same as he was last year. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
From a defensive standpoint anyway. Camavinga really helped Vinicius in a lot of games this season though.
Mm-hmm.
Offensively.
For sure.